In the sterile, indifferent expanse of an international airport, a moment of ugly prejudice is about to unfold. You're about to witness two security guards, drunk on a thimbleful of power, target a young black man for the crime of waiting for his flight. You'll feel the sting of injustice, the rising tide of anger. But what happens when the one man who can destroy their careers is sitting just 10 feet away, watching their every move? This isn't a story about hate. It's about the brutal, swift, and life-altering karma that follows. Stay with us as we unpack the day a new director handed out termination letters instead of warnings. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of controlled chaos. The rhythmic roll of spinner wheels on polished linoleum, the distant garbled announcements of final boarding calls, the low hum of 1,000 conversations blending into a single anonymous drone. For 17-year-old David Peterson, it was the sound of his future beginning. He sat alone at gate B24, a worn copy of Introduction to Aerospace Structures and Materials resting on his lap. Its pages were a forest of his own, annotations, frantic scribbles in the margins that translated complex equations into a language only he understood. David was not on vacation. He was on a mission. In less than 8 hours, he would land in Seattle, the epicenter of American aviation, to compete in the final round of the National Youth Aerospace Challenge. He was one of 20 finalists, a distinction that had been the singular focus of his existence for the past 2 years. His project, a revolutionary design for a variable camber wing flap using memory alloys, had already won him state and regional accolades. This was the final frontier, the competition that offered not just a trophy, but a full-ride scholarship to his dream school, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was dressed for the long flight, comfortable black joggers, a new pair of Nike sneakers, and a deep blue hoodie with MIT Engineering emblazoned across the chest in stark white letters. It was a gift from his mother, an article of clothing that was both a good luck charm and a manifestation of his aspirations. He'd adjusted the hood to cover his meticulously shaped fade, not out of any desire to conceal himself, but to create a small, private cocoon where he could focus. He had his boarding pass and ID tucked into the front pocket of his backpack, which sat carefully by his feet. His phone resting on the seat beside him showed a text from his mum. "Did you board yet, sweetie? Call me when you land. I love you to the moon and back. So proud." He smiled, a gentle, unassuming expression that briefly lit up his serious features. He was about to text back when a shadow fell over him. "Got a flight to catch? Or you just enjoying the view?" The voice was gravelly, laced with a weary cynicism that seemed as much a part of the uniform as the badge and the ill-fitting blazer. David looked up. 2 security guards stood before him. The one who had spoken was older, probably in his late 50s, with a florid face and a paunch that strained the buttons of his shirt. His name tag read, Kowalski F. His eyes, small and deeply set, scanned David with a practiced, dismissive air. The second guard was younger, perhaps in his late 20s. His tag read, Thorn M. He stood a step behind Kowalski, his posture less confrontational, his gaze flickering between David and the bustling concourse. There was a discomfort in his eyes, a silent wish to be anywhere else. "Yes, sir," David replied, his voice calm and respectful. He gestured towards the gate information screen. "Flight 73 to Seattle. It starts boarding in about 40 minutes. Kowalski grunted a sound of profound dissatisfaction. 40 minutes. Lot of time to just be sitting around. Looks like loitering to me." The word hung in the air, ugly and misplaced. David felt a familiar cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had felt it before in department stores where he was followed on quiet suburban streets where neighbors watched him a little too long. It was the feeling of being an anomaly, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be seen. "I'm just waiting for my gate to open," Sir David said, keeping his tone even. "I was reviewing my notes." He lifted the textbook slightly as evidence. Kowalski glanced at the book, his lip curling into a sneer. "Aerospace structures. Right, you an aspiring rocket scientist?" The sarcasm was thick enough to taste. "Something like that," David said quietly, deciding that explaining the nuances of the competition would be a waste of breath. "Uh-huh," Kowalski grunted again. "Let's see some ID. And a boarding pass. Now." Marcus Thorne shifted his weight, his discomfort now palpable. "Frank, he's right there at his gate. The flight's on the board." "You want to run security, Marcus, or you want me to Frank snapped without looking at his partner. His eyes remained locked on David, a predator, sizing up its prey. "I said ID. Now. Or we can take a walk down to the Port Authority office and you can explain it to them." David suppressed a sigh. This was the fork in the road. He could protest, could argue the patent injustice of being singled out, and risk this escalating into a missed flight and a shattered dream. Or he could comply, swallow the bitter pill of humiliation, and get on that plane. The choice was obvious. His future was in Seattle, not in a shouting match at Gate B-24. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into the front pocket of his backpack. He kept his movements measured, telegraphing his every action. He knew that sudden moves could be misinterpreted, used as a pretext for something far worse. He pulled out his wallet and the crisp paper of his boarding pass and handed them over. Kowalski snatched them. He scrutinized the driver's license, then the boarding pass, holding them up to the light as if they might be elaborate forgeries. "David Peterson," he read aloud, drawing out the syllables. He looked from the photo to David's face and back again. "Where'd you get the money for a ticket to Seattle?" The question was a direct hit, a blatant insinuation coated in prejudice. David's jaw tightened. "I have a job," he said, his voice dropping a decibel. "And my mother helped." "Your mother," Kowalski echoed, his tone dripping with disbelief. Unseen by any of them, a man sitting 3 rows back near the window overlooking the tarmac lowered the corner of his Wall Street Journal. He was in his early 40s, dressed in expensive but understated travel clothes, a charcoal gray cashmere sweater, dark trousers, and polished leather loafers. He wore no logos, no flashy watch. He blended in perfectly with the sea of business travelers. His name was Donovan Vance, and he had landed from London less than 2 hours ago. This was the final leg of his journey home to Seattle. It was also his first day, officially, as the new Senior Vice President and Global Director of Compliance and Ethics for Transatlantic Airways. He had spent the last month in their London headquarters drafting the very code of conduct that was supposed to govern the behavior of every single employee and contractor, from the CEO down to the third-party security guards at Gate B-24. He watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of cold fury. He didn't reach for his phone to record. He didn't need to. He was a witness, and his memory was eidetic. He saw the boys' calm demeanor, the guards' escalating aggression, the younger guards' cowardly silence. He saw the textbook, the MIT hoodie, the weary resignation in the young man's eyes, and he recognized it all. He had lived variations of this scene his entire life, but now, for the first time, he was in a position to do more than just live it. He was in a position to end it. He folded his newspaper, set it down on the empty seat beside him, and watched. The performance, he thought grimly, was not yet over, and he wanted to see the finale. The tension at gate B24 had thickened, drawing the furtive glances of other passengers. A woman with 2 young children subtly pulled them closer. A businessman lowered his laptop screen, pretending to be engrossed in his work, but watching the scene in his peripheral vision. The air, once filled with the mundane hum of travel, was now charged with the specific, uncomfortable silence of a public confrontation. Frank Kowalski was enjoying the attention. It fueled him. For him, authority was not a responsibility, it was a performance. And David Peterson was his unwilling co-star. He held David's license and boarding pass like trophies, a tangible symbol of his power over the young man. Everything seems to be in order, right, Frank? Marcus Thorne ventured, his voice low and tight. He was trying to give his partner an off-ramp, a way to de-escalate without losing face. Let's just give him his stuff back and keep moving. Frank shot him a venomous look. I'll decide when everything is in order. You see this hoodie? He gestured disdainfully at David's chest. MIT. You know what that stands for? Made-up Institute of Technology for a kid like this? He chuckled at his own joke, a harsh, grating sound. David's composure, so carefully maintained, began to fray at the edges. The insult wasn't just to him, it was to his dream, to the years of sleepless nights spent hunched over textbooks, the sacrifices his mother made, the single-minded devotion that had brought him to this gate. Sir David said, his voice harder now, I'm a finalist in a national aerospace competition. That hoodie was a gift. May I please have my identification back? My flight will be boarding soon. He reached for his phone, which was still on the adjacent seat, intending only to check the time and send the promised text to his mother. It was a simple, reflexive action. But to Frank Kowalski, it was a challenge. Hey, what do you think you're doing? He barked, his voice suddenly sharp and loud. Reaching for something? You reaching for a weapon? The accusation was so absurd, so theatrically paranoid, that for a moment, David could only stare. It's my phone, he said, bewildered. I was just going to check the time. We'll tell you the time. Kowalski's face was now inches from David's. Spittle flew from his lips. You don't move unless we tell you to move. You kids are all the same. Think you're tough, always reaching for your phones, probably calling your friends to come cause trouble. Before David could even process the cascade of stereotypes, Kowalski acted. With a grunt of effort, he shoved David hard in the chest with the heel of his hand. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a violent, unprovoked act of assault. The force of it sent David stumbling backward. He tripped over his own backpack, his arms flailing for balance. He crashed into the row of rigid airport seats behind him, the hard plastic edge digging painfully into his back. His head snapped back and struck the metal frame with a sickening thud. For a moment, the world dissolved into a smear of bright lights and sharp pain. His textbook slid from his lap and clattered to the floor, its pages splayed open like a broken wing. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers. The invisible line had been crossed. This was no longer a tense questioning. It was a physical assault. Several phones previously hidden were now raised, their small red recording lights blinking in the fluorescent glare. Marcus Thorne's face went white with panic. Frank, what the hell are you doing? He hissed, finally finding his voice. But it was too late. The act was done. He looked at the passengers at their phones, at David struggling to sit up, rubbing the back of his head, and he felt the ground beneath him turn to quicksand. David's initial shock gave way to a surge of pure adrenaline. The humiliation, the accusations, and now the physical violence It all coalesced into a hot, righteous anger. But even then, some deep-seated instinct of self-preservation, drilled into him by a lifetime of cautionary talks from his mother, kept him from retaliating physically. He knew with a certainty that was both sad and absolute that if he laid a hand on this guard, his own story would end right here. He would be the aggressor, the thug, and his dreams of MIT and Seattle would evaporate. He pushed himself up his back, screaming in protest. He looked Kowalski dead in the eye. "You had no right to do that," he said, his voice shaking, but not with fear. It was shaking with rage. "You assaulted me. I did nothing wrong." Kowalski, realizing he had gone too far in front of so many witnesses, immediately shifted to a defensive posture, puffing out his chest. The suspect became non-compliant and made a sudden, aggressive move. "I used the minimum force necessary to maintain control of the situation." He was speaking for the phones, now reciting a script he had likely used before. "The area is secure, Marcus. Get on the radio. Tell them we have a hostile individual we're detaining for questioning." "Hostile!" David exclaimed, his voice rising in disbelief. "I was sitting here reading a book." From his vantage point, Donovan Vance had seen it all. He had noted the boy's calm, deliberate movements. He had seen the guard's irrational escalation. He had witnessed the push, a clear and unambiguous act of battery. He noted Kowalski's immediate self-serving narration of the event, a classic tactic to retroactively justify excessive force. Donovan's gaze shifted to the younger guard, Marcus Thorne. He saw the flicker of protest in the man's eyes die as soon as Kowalski asserted his dominance. He saw him reach for his radio, his hand trembling slightly. He was a coward, Donovan thought, and cowardice in the face of injustice was a form of complicity. It was just as toxic, just as corrosive to the values his company purported to uphold. Donovan had gathered enough. He had the complete picture: the profiling, the harassment, the verbal abuse, the unprovoked assault, the attempt to falsify a report, and the complicity of a partner. It was a textbook case of everything he had been hired to eradicate. He took a slow, deep breath, not to calm himself, but to center his focus. The cold fury inside him was now honed to a fine point. He stood up, his movements fluid and deliberate. He was not a large man, but he carried himself with an aura of unshakable confidence, an innate authority that had nothing to do with a uniform or a badge. He began to walk toward the unfolding drama at Gate B24. Each step was measured, silent. The anaconda, he thought, with grim irony, does not hiss before it strikes. The scene at Gate B24 was reaching its frantic crescendo. Frank Kowalski, high on his own manufactured drama, was ready to take the final step. "On your feet," he barked at David. "We're taking you to the substation. You can explain your story to the Port Authority police." He reached for his handcuffs, the metallic click echoing in the tense silence. Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of miserable conflict, had the radio to his lips. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3B at Gate B24. We have a situation." He couldn't bring himself to use the word hostile. David remained seated on the floor, momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of it all. They were going to arrest him. After being assaulted, he was going to be arrested. The absurdity was dizzying. His flight, his competition, his scholarship, he could see them all dissolving into a bureaucratic nightmare of police reports and legal fees. His mother's proud, smiling face flashed in his mind, and a wave of despair washed over him. It was at that precise moment that Donovan Vance arrived. He didn't rush in. He didn't shout. He simply entered the cleared space around the confrontation, his presence immediately altering the dynamics of the scene. He stopped a few feet away, his calm gaze taking in every detail, Kowalski's hand on his cuffs, Thorne's trembling radio, and David still on the floor, looking up, with a mixture of anger and hopelessness. That will be quite enough. Donovan's voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. It was a voice accustomed to being heard, a voice that carried the weight of inherent command. Kowalski turned his face, contorted with irritation at the interruption. Who was this man in the expensive sweater, daring to interfere with official security business? Back off, sir, he snapped, dismissing Donovan with a wave of his hand. This is a restricted security situation. Get back behind the line. Donovan didn't move. He met Kowalski's aggressive stare with an unnervingly placid one of his own. There is no restricted security situation here, he stated, his tone flat and factual. What I see is a young man, a paying passenger, being harassed and assaulted by two employees of a contracted security firm. And I can assure you that is my business. Kowalski took a step toward Donovan, puffing out his chest in a classic display of intimidation. You don't know what you saw, buddy. I am Senior Security Officer Frank Kowalski. Now, for the last time, I am ordering you to step away before I add you to the report for interfering with an officer. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Donovan's lips. It was a smile of profound, chilling confidence. A report? Oh, I have no doubt there will be reports, many of them. I've already initiated the process. He let that statement hang in the air for a beat. He had, in the minute before he stood up, sent a series of encrypted texts from his corporate phone. The first was to Maria Flores, the head of human resources for North American operations. The second was to Robert Chen, the JFK Airport Operations Manager for Transatlantic Airways. The third, a brief and pointed message, was to Richard Sterling, the airline's CEO. It had read simply, Code 1 Ethics Breach, in progress, Terminal 4. My location. Handling personally. Call you in 30. The C-suite of Transatlantic Airways was now, figuratively speaking, watching. Kowalski was momentarily thrown off by Donovan's calm certainty. What are you talking about? Who the hell are you? Donovan slowly reached into the inner pocket of his cashmere sweater. He moved with the same deliberate slowness David had used earlier, but for an entirely different reason. It was for dramatic effect. He withdrew a slim, black leather wallet. He didn't flash it. He opened it and presented a single, elegant card. It was a Transatlantic Airways corporate ID bearing his photograph name and title. My name, he said, his voice dropping into a register of cold, hard finality, is Donovan Vance. And as of 8:00 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, this morning I am the Senior Vice President and Global Director of Compliance and Ethics for this airline. The airline whose name is on that young man's boarding pass. The airline whose reputation you are currently setting on fire in the middle of this concourse. So to answer your question, Officer Kowalski, I am the man who signs off on the conduct standards for every contractor we employ. I am the man you answer to. The color drained from Frank Kowalski's face. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging him from ruddy-faced aggression to a pasty, sickly white. The hand that had been resting on his handcuffs dropped to his side as if it had been burned. He stared at the ID, then at Donovan's unyielding face, and his mind struggled to connect the well-dressed passenger with the specter of ultimate corporate authority. Marcus Thorne looked like he had seen a ghost. The radio slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He understood immediately and completely the depth of the hole they were in. The onlookers, many of whom were still recording, began to murmur. The twist was better than anything they could have imagined. The entitled guards, the victimized young man, and now the surprise appearance of the boss. It was real-life drama playing out in real time. Donovan did not bask in the moment. He immediately shifted his attention to David, his entire demeanor softening. He knelt, not caring about the creases in his expensive trousers, bringing himself to eye level with the young man who was still sitting on the hard floor. "Mr. Peterson," he said, his voice now filled with a genuine warmth and concern that stood in stark contrast to his tone with the guards. "My name is Donovan Vance. On behalf of Transatlantic Airways, I want to offer you my most profound and sincere apology for what you have just endured. This is not who we are. This is not what we stand for. And I promise you, this will be handled." He offered a hand to David. "Are you injured? Did you hit your head?" David, still dazed by the sudden turn of events, took the offered hand. Donovan's grip was firm and steady. I think so. My back hurts, and I hit my head on the seat frame." "We'll have our on-site paramedics check you out immediately," Donovan said, helping him to his feet. He then picked up David's fallen textbook, handling it with a reverence that acknowledged its importance. He handed it back to David. "I believe this belongs to you. Aerospace structures. Impressive." He then turned back to the two frozen security guards. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of glacial corporate steel. "Officer Kowalski, Officer Thorne, you will hand me your airport identification and security badges. Now." It was not a request. Kowalski hesitated for a fraction of a second, a final, futile spark of defiance. "Do not," Donovan warned, his voice dangerously low, "make me ask again." Slowly, with trembling hands, Frank Kowalski unclipped his ID from his blazer. Marcus Thorne did the same, his movements clumsy with fear. They held them out. Donovan took them without a word, slipping them into his pocket. They were now, for all intents and purposes, civilians. "You will now escort me and Mr. Peterson to the main security operations office for this terminal," Donovan commanded. "You will not speak to him. You will not speak to each other. You will walk 5 paces behind us. Your direct supervisor and a representative from Human Resources will be meeting us there. Is that understood?" Kowalski gave a jerky, almost imperceptible nod. Thorne just stared, his eyes wide with terror. The walk from Gate B24 to the security office was the longest walk of their lives. A silent, humiliating parade. Donovan walked beside David, speaking to him in low, reassuring tones about his flight and his competition in Seattle, deliberately ignoring the two men trailing behind them like specters at a funeral. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been utterly and irrevocably shattered. And Frank Kowalski was beginning to understand that he hadn't just lost an argument. He had lost everything. The Transatlantic Airways Security Operations Office was a sterile, windowless box tucked away in a corridor behind a row of fast food chains. It smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Under normal circumstances, it was a place of bureaucratic tedium. Today, it was an execution chamber. Donovan Vance led David to one of the chairs against the wall and instructed him to sit. "Someone from our medical team is on their way, Mr. Peterson. Just take a moment." He then turned his attention to Kowalski and Thorne, who stood awkwardly in the center of the room, stripped of their badges and their bluster. They looked small and pathetic under the harsh fluorescent lights. A moment later, The door opened, and two people hurried in. The first was Robert Chen, the airport operations manager, a harried-looking man in his 40s whose face was pale with anxiety. The second was a woman appearing on a large television screen, mounted to the wall, which had blinked to life. A caption identified hers as Maria Flores, VP of Human Resources. She was in a different time zone, but her expression was one of immediate and grave seriousness. Donovan Robert Chen began, his voice strained. "What's happened? I got your text." Donovan held up a hand, commanding the room without raising his voice. "Robert, Maria, thank you for joining. Before we begin, I'd like you both to meet David Peterson." He gestured to David. "Mr. Peterson is a passenger on his way to a national academic competition in Seattle. He is also the victim of an unprovoked assault and targeted harassment by contracted security personnel operating under our authority." He then turned his icy gaze on the two former guards. "And these are the men responsible, Mr. Frank Kowalski and Mr. Marcus Thorne." Maria Flores' image on the screen sharpened. "Mr. Kowalski, Mr. Thorne, I am Maria Flores, head of HR. Mr. Vance has relayed the preliminary details. I need you to understand that this is an official disciplinary hearing. Everything from this point forward is on the record." Frank Kowalski, seeing a potential lifeline in the formal process, found his voice. It was raspy, laced with a desperate whining tone. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a misunderstanding. The passenger was acting suspiciously. He was loitering for an extended period, became agitated when questioned, and then made a sudden, aggressive move. I acted to neutralize a potential threat according to my training." Donovan listened to the litany of lies with an expression of utter disdain. He let Kowalski finish digging his own grave. When he was done, Donovan took a small, sleek audio recorder from his pocket and placed it on the table. A sudden, aggressive move, Donovan repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "You mean when he reached for his phone to text his mother? Or perhaps you're referring to the moment he was quietly reading a textbook on aerospace engineering." He pressed a button on the recorder. Kowalski's own voice, tinny but perfectly clear, filled the silent room. "You an aspiring rocket scientist? Where'd you get the money for a ticket to Seattle? You kids are all the same. Think you're tough, always reaching for your phones, probably calling your friends to come cause trouble." Donovan stopped the recording. And that was before the assault. He looked at Robert Chen. "Robert, have you had a chance to pull the CCTV footage from Gate B24, time-stamped approximately 10 minutes ago?" Robert nodded grimly. "I have it right here." He tapped his tablet, and the main screen flickered from Maria's face to a crystal-clear, multi-angle view of the gate. They all watched in silence the initial conversation, Kowalski snatching the ID, David's calm posture, his simple act of reaching for his phone, and then the shockingly violent push that sent him flying backward. The video left no room for interpretation, no space for lies. Kowalski's face, which had been pale, now turned a blotchy, mottled red of pure, unadulterated panic. The evidence was absolute. Maria Flores' voice came from the speaker, cold as a winter wind. "Mr. Kowalski, your actions are a flagrant violation of at least 6 articles in the Transatlantic Airways Code of Conduct for Contractors, including but not limited to Section 3A on passenger respect, Section 4C on de-escalation protocols, and Section 7B, the zero-tolerance policy on harassment and discrimination. Furthermore, what I just witnessed on that video is by legal definition battery. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Mr. Thorne, the code also has a clause regarding the duty to intervene. Your silence and inaction make you complicit. Marcus Thorne finally broke. His shoulders slumped, and he looked at the floor, his face a portrait of shame. "He's my senior officer," he mumbled. I didn't know what to do. "You do your job," Donovan cut in, his voice sharp. "You uphold the standards you swore to uphold. You protect the passenger, not the bully with the badge. The moment you chose silence, you chose his side." Donovan walked over to the table and stood directly in front of the two men. He was no longer just a director of compliance. He was the embodiment of a promise he had made to the CEO and to himself to bring integrity and accountability to this company. Transatlantic Airways has a brand promise, he said, his voice low and intense. "We promise safety, comfort, and respect to every single person who buys a ticket. You two have single-handedly violated that promise in the most egregious way possible. You didn't see a brilliant young man on his way to a competition. You saw a stereotype, you saw a target. And in doing so, you have become a liability that this company will not tolerate for one more second." He looked at Maria on the screen. She gave a single, firm nod. "Mr. Kowalski, Mr. Thorne," Donovan announced, his voice ringing with finality. "Pursuant to the authority vested in me by Trans Airlines and in accordance with the terms of our contract with your employer, your security credentials and airport access are permanently revoked. As of this moment, your employment is terminated effective immediately." The words hit Frank Kowalski like a physical blow. "Terminated? You can't do that. I have a union. I have rights. Your union representative will be notified of this hearing," Maria Flores said calmly from the screen. "They will also be provided with the audio and video evidence. I suspect their support will be limited. As for your rights, you have the right to be escorted from this airport by Port Authority police, which will happen in approximately 5 minutes. You will collect your personal belongings from your locker under supervision, and you will not set foot on this property again." The finality of it was absolute. This wasn't a suspension, it was an erasure. Donovan then did something that sealed their fate. He turned to David, who had watched the entire proceeding with a quiet, stunned intensity. A paramedic had arrived and was discreetly checking his head and back. "Mr. Peterson," Donovan said respectfully, "the company will of course be issuing a formal apology and offering compensation for the distress you've suffered. But I also want to inform you that we will provide you with our full legal support free of charge should you choose to press criminal charges against Mr. Kowalski for assault. We have the evidence, we have the witnesses, and we will stand with you." That was the true moment of reckoning. Firing was one thing. A corporate-backed criminal prosecution was another. Frank Kowalski's world crumbled completely. He wasn't just losing his job, he was facing a criminal record, the permanent loss of his security license, and the end of any possibility of working in law enforcement or security ever again. He stared at Donovan, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and sheer terror. He saw not just a corporate executive, but the architect of his complete and utter ruin. He had picked on a quiet teenager in a hoodie, and in doing so, had stumbled into the one man on earth with the power, the motive, and the will to burn his life to the ground. The termination was just the beginning. True karma is not a single, explosive event, but a slow, creeping rot that infects every corner of a person's life. For Frank Kowalski and Marcus Thorne, the fallout from their actions at Gate B24 spread like a contagion. For David Peterson, the immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of unexpected positive change. Donovan Vance was ruthlessly efficient. Before David's flight even began boarding, he was rebooked into Seat 1A in first class. The head of the flight crew came to personally apologize to him. Robert Chen, the airport manager, handed him a voucher for $1,000 in flight credits and the direct contact information for the airline's top customer relations executive. Mr. Peterson, Donovan said, as he walked him to the jet bridge past the other boarding passengers who now looked at David with a mixture of awe and respect. Your only focus should be on winning your competition in Seattle. When you get back, my office will be in touch. Transatlantic Airways would be honored to make a significant contribution to your MIT scholarship fund. He handed David his personal business card. If you need anything at all, you call me directly. David, overwhelmed, could only stammer his thanks. As he settled into the plush leather of his first-class seat, the flight attendant offered him a pre-departure orange juice in a real glass. He looked out the window. The ground crew bustling below, and the events of the last hour felt surreal. He had been assaulted and nearly arrested. Now, he was being treated like royalty and offered a corporate sponsorship. He took out his phone and finally texted his mom. Boarding now. Little bit of drama at the gate, but everything is okay. Actually, it's more than okay. I'll tell you everything when I land. Love you. He won the competition, fueled by a new sense of purpose and the righteous anger that had burned away his nerves. His presentation was flawless. He returned home a champion with a full-ride scholarship secured and a laudatory letter from the CEO of Transatlantic Airways waiting for him, which mentioned the airline's newly established Donovan Vance Accountability and Integrity Grant, for which he was the first recipient. With the airline's legal team guiding him, he filed a formal criminal complaint for assault. For Frank Kowalski, the downward spiral was swift and brutal. The termination was the first stone in an avalanche. The security contractors he worked for, facing a massive penalty and the potential loss of their lucrative contract with the airline, fired him without ceremony and offered no legal support. His union, after reviewing the video, sent him a terse letter stating that due to the severity and indefensibility of his actions, they would not represent him in arbitration. The news of the incident, and especially the involvement of a high-ranking executive, spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community of airport workers. He was blacklisted. No other security firm at JFK Newark or LaGuardia would even grant him an interview. His state security guard license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The assault charge, backed by the airline's formidable legal department, was not the misdemeanor he'd hoped for. It was a serious offense. Legal fees began to mount. He had to cash out his meager 401k to pay his lawyer. The stress poisoned his home life. His wife, already fed up with his bitterness and bigotry, which he usually reserved for dinner-table rants, saw the video of the assault on a local news clip. She saw the undisguised malice in his face, the thuggish way he shoved a 17-year-old boy. It was the final straw. She packed her bags one afternoon while he was at a disastrous job interview for a night watchman position at a warehouse. She left a note on the kitchen table that said, "I can't live with this hate anymore." Within 6 months, he was broke, alone, and unemployable. He lost the house to foreclosure. The last anyone heard, he was working off the books as a bouncer at a seedy bar in a forgotten corner of Queens, the paunch that had strained his uniform, now a symbol of his complete defeat. The power he had craved and abused was gone, leaving only a bitter, resentful old man who blamed everyone but himself for his downfall. The karma was not just that he lost his job, it was that he was forced to live the rest of his life as the powerless, invisible man he had always feared he was. Marcus Thorne's fate was different, a quieter, more insidious form of karmic justice. He, too, was fired and blacklisted from airport security. But during the HR debrief, when given a chance to speak for himself, away from Kowalski's toxic influence, he broke down. He expressed profound remorse, not for getting caught, but for his cowardice. "I knew it was wrong," he'd confessed to Maria Flores, his voice choked with tears. "I saw the kid's face. He was just a kid. I should have done something." Donovan Vance, while unyielding on the necessity of his termination, heard the flicker of genuine regret. He did not offer him a job or legal support. Marcus's complicity had to have consequences. But after the official proceedings were over, Donovan spoke to him alone for a moment. "Regret is a powerful teacher, Mr. Thorne." Donovan had said, his tone devoid of anger. "But it's only valuable if it leads to change. You have a choice now. You can let this make you bitter like your former partner, or you can use it to understand the cost of silence. The next time you see an injustice in whatever job you have, no matter how small, I hope you remember this day. I hope you remember the look on that young man's face, and I hope you find the courage you lacked today." Marcus never forgot those words. He couldn't find a job in any field that required a background check. He ended up working as a dishwasher in a 24-hour diner, the clatter of plates, a constant reminder of the sound of his radio hitting the terminal floor. He was haunted not by failure, but by his own moral failing. His karma was not a dramatic collapse, but a long, quiet sentence of self-reflection, the daily burden of knowing he had stood by and done nothing while injustice was done. It was the slow, painful process of rebuilding a sense of integrity from the ashes of his own cowardice. 3 months after the confrontation at Gate B24, the incident had metastasized from a mere event into something far more potent, a corporate legend. Within the vast, interconnected world of transatlantic airways, the story was whispered in crew lounges in Hong Kong, recounted by gate agents in Chicago, and analyzed by executives in London. It became a benchmark. A modern-day fable with a clear moral accountability was no longer an abstract concept in a corporate handbook. It had a name, and that name was Donovan Vance. From his new corner office in Seattle, with its sweeping panorama of the Puget Sound's gray-blue waters, Donovan was waging a quiet, systematic war. The framed photo of a triumphant David Peterson beside his project and the laudatory letter from MIT were not trophies of a battle won. They were the strategic maps for the campaign ahead. He had leveraged the political capital from the JFK incident, not for self-promotion, but as a crowbar to pry open the ossified structures of corporate inertia. His first move had been a private meeting with Richard Sterling in the CEO's penthouse office. The older man, known for his cutthroat business acumen, had listened intently as Donovan laid out his vision not just for a new training module, but for a fundamental philosophical shift. "What you witnessed," Donovan, Sterling had said, steepling his fingers as he gazed out at the city skyline, "wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom of a rot we've allowed to fester for years. We write checks to these security firms, we assume their training is adequate, and we look the other way because it's easier. We talk about brand image, but our brand is on the line every time a person in a uniform with our logo nearby interacts with a passenger. What Kowalski did, he didn't just assault a young man. He assaulted our brand. He used our authority as a weapon against one of our own customers. Sterling had stood up and walked to his window. Years ago, as a junior executive, I saw a gate agent be horrifically rude to an elderly couple who didn't speak English. I felt that same flash of anger you must have felt. But I did nothing. I was too junior, too scared of rocking the boat. I regret it to this day. He turned to face Donovan, his eyes hard. You have the position I lacked then. You have my full backing. I don't want you to just rock the boat, Donovan. I want you to rebuild the entire damn fleet. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, burn the old system to the ground. Armed with that unequivocal mandate, Donovan had summoned the heads of the top 3 security contracting firms that serviced Transatlantic's North American hubs to Seattle. They sat around a polished mahogany table in a sterile boardroom, a trio of gruff, middle-aged men who smelled of stale cigars and entitlement. The most vocal among them was a man named O'Malley, the owner of the very company that had employed Kowalski and Thorne. With all due respect, Mr. Vance, O'Malley began, his tone already defensive. Frank Kowalski was a bad apple, a regrettable incident. We've dealt with him. Firing 2 men is one thing, but forcing a complete overhaul of our entire training protocol seems like a costly overreaction. Donovan let the man finish, his expression unreadable. He then slid 3 thick binders across the table. On the cover of each, in stark lettering, was the title, The Vance Mandate, a Protocol for Proactive Dignity. This is not an overhaul, Mr. O'Malley, Donovan said, his voice calm and dangerously soft. It is the new minimum standard for doing business with this airline. Overreaction. For the last fiscal year, passenger complaints related to contractor conduct have risen 18%. Internal reports show at least 3 other incidents with serious legal exposure that were quietly settled. Kowalski wasn't a bad apple. He was the product of an orchard that has been neglected. Your orchard. He tapped the binder. The mandate is built on 3 pillars. The first is debiasing. We are not asking your officers to not have biases. That's humanly impossible. We are demanding they learn to recognize them in real time and consciously act against them. The second is de-escalation. The old model of command and control is dead. Your people will learn to diffuse a situation with language, not force. The third and most important is dignity. Every passenger, from a first-class elite to a student in a hoodie, is to be treated as a valued guest, full stop. Their dignity is not negotiable. O'Malley scoffed, flipping through the pages. Role-playing psychological evaluations. This reads like a university syllabus, not a security manual. You'll turn my guards into social workers. It'll make them soft, hesitant. No, Donovan countered, leaning forward. It will make them professionals. Hesitation born from consideration is infinitely preferable to action born from prejudice. Your guards will undergo 40 hours of this new training certified by my department. They will be recertified annually. Those who cannot or will not pass will not work at our gates. If that proves too costly or onerous for your company, I understand. Transatlantic is currently accepting bids from competitors who may be more aligned with our commitment to excellence. The threat was veiled, but it landed with the force of a sledgehammer. The other 2 contractors immediately began nodding, assuring Donovan of their full cooperation. O'Malley sat back, his face flushed with anger, but he was defeated. He knew his multi-million-dollar contract was on the line. The era of complacent mediocrity was over. Meanwhile, in the hallowed ivy-covered halls of MIT, David Peterson was navigating a different kind of challenge. He was no longer just a prodigy from a humble background. He was now a champion, a full scholarship student, and the inaugural recipient of a grant with a story. The initial weeks were a blur of advanced calculus, quantum physics, and the dizzying realization that he was surrounded by people just as brilliant, if not more so, than himself. Yet the scar from Gate B24 remained. One afternoon, cutting across Killian Court, he saw two campus police officers questioning a student. His heart began to pound in his chest. His palms grew slick with sweat, and for a terrifying second, he was back on the cold linoleum floor of Terminal 4, the sneering face of Frank Kowalski looming over him. He had to stop, lean against a tree, and take deep, calming breaths, reminding himself where he was. He was safe. He belonged here. The incident had given him a new purpose, but it had also left behind a sliver of trauma, a phantom pain that ambushed him at unexpected moments. The official letter about the Donovan Vance Accountability and Integrity Grant had given him a strange sense of validation. It wasn't just money. It was a statement. It was proof that the system, for once, had worked. When his favorite astrophysics professor, Dr. Aris Thorne, no relation to the disgraced guard, a fact David had morbidly checked, asked him about the unique name of his grant, David found himself telling the whole story. The professor listened, his expression growing more and more serious, and when David finished, he simply said, "Mr. Peterson, it seems you've learned a lesson in social engineering just as valuable as any you'll learn in aerospace. Remember that. The principles of structural integrity apply to societies as much as they do to fuselages." One crisp autumn evening, a package bearing the Transatlantic Airways logo arrived at his dorm. Inside, nestled in custom-fit foam, was a perfect die-cast model of a 787 Dreamliner, the aircraft that had carried him toward his destiny. It was heavy, cool to the touch, a thing of substance and precision. On its polished wooden base was a small, engraved plaque. It didn't mention the incident, the guards, or the drama. It simply read, "Mr. Peterson, the sky is not the limit. It is the beginning. Keep looking up, DV." David held the model in his hands, tracing the elegant curve of its wings. It was more than a gift. It was a symbol. It was a reminder that structures, whether of metal alloys or of human systems, could be broken. But they could also be redesigned, rebuilt, and made stronger than before. The push from Frank Kowalski had been a force meant to ground him, to pin him to the floor of a world that saw him as less. But the actions of Donovan Vance and the resilience he had discovered in himself had created a force far greater lift. The world had tried to break him, and instead it had given him wings. The story you've just heard is a stark reminder that injustice often thrives in silence, in the moments when good people choose to look away. But it's also a powerful testament to the fact that one person armed with integrity and the authority to act can change everything. The downfall of Frank Kowalski and Marcus Thorne wasn't just about losing their jobs. It was about the complete and total consequences of their choices, a hard lesson in accountability delivered by a man who refused to let prejudice be the face of his company. David Peterson's journey to success was almost derailed by hate, but was ultimately accelerated by an act of corporate courage. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of accountability and the importance of standing up for what's right, please help us share it. Like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with your friends and family. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of drama, justice, and the powerful forces of karma. Thank you for listening.